Bob will be back usually twice a week to talk about the science of healing tissues, and we've had, I guess we can keep track of it now with all our fancy things on our website links. We've had a number of people, actually, a large number of people actually looking at the A9A device, which will actually stimulate, control pain, stimulate healing and regeneration, and improve circulation. You need to make a decision out there, because if you think if you're having chronic knee pain, you say, I'm going to order Dr. Deagle's Nutrimeds. I'm going to take the Tendon Bender Joint Performance Collagen Max and Mountain Red Velvet, and I'm going to slap on with a little fancy knee brace, on my knee that's sore, a MICROPULSE device, and I'm going to get better. And I'm not going to let that doctor do a total knee replacement, which will not only be expensive even in terms of copay, but your knee will never be the same because it'll be gone. You will have an artificial bionic replacement that never will be as good as your real knee. And that's just one example of it. Now, if you're trying to heal your kidneys and you've got marginal kidney function, you're taking our vein away and our nattokinase and Nutrifos and Neurogen and take things to stimulate stem cells, and you're even going for a cardio stem cell injection at the Santa Cruz Clinic in Mexico for StemMedica in San Diego. Guess what? If you don't have the right signal and the right soil, the right substance there, you need the right signal in order for those stem cells to take and for those tissues in your kidney to heal. So you slap the electrodes over the areas of your back, over the kidneys, at the base of your rib cage. You wear it as a belt on your body during the day, and guess what? You take the right nutraceuticals, and voila, the kidney function over the next number of months is going to regenerate. That's how amazing this is, isn't it? It really is a remarkable brain. It's almost like you decide, and I got a new tagline for it, you decide, do you want to 3D print yourself into the future? And that's what the signal of the MicroPulse does, is help you to reprint yourself into the future.
Well, the main thing is that cells are very intelligent. One of the things I discovered over many years of researching in tissue engineering is that you pretty much just have to give them the right sort of environment, and they really take care of things themselves. And it doesn't mean that you have to have all kinds of synthetic growth factors or crazy things like that. It's just, the research really seems to show if you can compensate for a negative environment, one that's pro-inflammatory and degenerative, if you can prevent that signal, or if you can supersede that signal, and then you provide the right substrate, the cells have to live in a 3D environment, in adult tissues. They have to reorganize into these three-dimensional structures to be healthy, and that's what they naturally do if you give them the signal and the substance that they need. That's what they'll do every time.
Yeah, they really will. Now, the interesting thing is that if I saw a recent article talking about the idea of printing organs. In fact, they had this on the big picture with CalPed, that in the future you may be able to just print an organ in order to replace it. Well, you could print the actual structure on a collagen backbone. Let's say you were able to print the collagen. But the stem cells will never differentiate without the right signal.
Well, that's exactly right. And I've been involved peripherally with that technology since the very beginning. The first time I saw that technology actually was at a 3D printing for living tissues, was at a DARPA meeting, and you're probably familiar with DARPA. I was at a DARPA meeting. DARPA is important because they invented things such as the Internet. A lot of people don't know about them, but they're sort of the advanced technology development wing of the Department of Defense, created because of Sputnik to prevent any future technological surprise. So they're way out there on the power curve, way ahead of everybody else. Yeah. And I was at a DARPA meeting in Washington, D.C., and some of the guys from the Naval Research Lab were actually 3D printing tissues. And this would have been in 2001. So now you're starting to hear a lot about it in the news, but the actual work in that area started at least 15 years ago. And just as you say, you can force the cells into the shape of the tissue that you want, but the way that, if you don't have the right signals, it won't be the tissue that you want. And this happens again and again in tissue engineering. I call it tissue topiary, right? Just because you carve something into a shape doesn't mean that it's the thing that you carved into that shape. Just because you carve a bush, into the shape of a giraffe, like you'd see at one of the theme parks, that doesn't mean it's a giraffe. It's just a bush carved into a certain shape. It doesn't have any of the signals internal to a giraffe.
That's funny. The University of Minnesota is doing a lot of work on this area of tissutopia, using, for example, take a sheep heart. They'll flush all the tissue off it, and they have the matrix.
Published in that area. That's called decellularization, and that turns out to be a very effective and interesting approach to tissue engineering. And the reason that it works is that you're retaining the extracellular matrix, which for a long time in tissue engineering we said the matrix is the message. We believed for about 15 years that the ECM by itself was a sufficient message. It turns out, of course, that's not the case. But that whole area is based on the belief that if you take the cells out, then you've removed the sort of antigenic quality of the tissue. But collagen is actually the genetic code for collagen is conserved across many species. So your collagen is identical, to mine, is identical to that you'd find in most mammals. And so we don't reject that material. We reject only the cellular material. The theory then being, if we take, you name the organ, big ones that they use are kidneys, pieces of liver, and heart, and actually remove the cells from the donor and then take the recipient cells and put it in. That's called a cell decellularization, recellularization approach to tissue engineering. And that's getting close. That helps you get the cells into the 3D environment. But the one thing that's essential for a tissue to grow is it has to be in a living body. And this was actually proven by a surgeon that I know very well. His name's Bob Bartlett. And he proved that, in fact, this has been known since 1930, that if you take any organ out of a living body system, it degenerates into earlier cell, lines. We can't maintain an organ outside the body because it's outside and away from the organismal signal. And that was actually proven in the 1930s by a fellow named Alexis Carrel, who got a Nobel Prize, and a very famous biomedical engineer whose name was Charles Lindbergh. At the time, Charles Lindbergh was a lot more famous as an engineer than he was as an aviator. History has forgotten that, but he was actually the first major tissue engineer in history. And they proved with over 100,000 experiments that there was no way to maintain a tissue or an organ intact outside of the body for more than a couple of days. And we still have that problem to today. When we do organ donors, they got to rush the kidneys, they got to rush the liver, they got to rush the heart. They've only got a few hours. We do not understand yet what the signal is that causes that degeneration, but it's a signal, and it's inherent to intact, functioning, healthy, whole organisms. And tissue cannot survive in the absence of it. So this whole matter of signal and substance is really key to health.
Yeah,
it's really key to organ function.
Well, I can throw a few bits of information in there. The first thing is the body communicates through what's called phonon maser waves, which are basically mazed sound, light, and magnetic impulses, or biophotons, that travel along collagen, and they actually travel along the phenolic side groups of collagen throughout the body. So collagen is basically an informational superconductor. It interfaces with other extracellular matrix proteins, so that when they decellularize, they also remove these other proteins, which act as cofactors to allow the transcellular communication of the signal, which comes from the central nervous system and from main organs, basically generating signal. So your CNS generates signal that actually creates what they call a morphogenic signal to stimulate that matrix. So if you want to get well, if you want to control your pain, don't just be a looky-loo. Get on there. We got this special on now. Dr. Deagle is the code, Dr. Deagle. Go to the link at the top of Nutrimedical on our affiliates page for the MICROPULSE. A nice change of pace here. We're going to have Daniel Fazina. Daniel has a number of books. One of his favorite ones here is Divine Interventions, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today. And there's 50 true stories, which are pretty remarkable. Daniel has his own. I think you have 2 stories. But the question I asked just before the break was, how do people enter into this we call tapped-in life where they can expect a miracle? And I want to hear some of your stories first, but I'd like to kind of touch on this question first, because there'll be people out there with, financial problems, health problems. Why do some people get miracles and other people don't? Why do
Dr.
some
Bill.
people? Yeah, that's a tough question, isn't it?
It is. It's one that I think man has wrestled with from time immemorial. But Dr. Bill, it's great to be on with you, and I'm honored, and it's a real pleasure to be on your show. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'd like you to kind of maybe tell your miracle, but give us some ideas on the principles behind what I call walking in miracles, because it literally is a walk. People need to understand that a miraculous life with God, it's not easy living here on earth. And we're all sinners. But guess what? God still overlooks that. And I tell people, I'll give a couple of principles today that I think will give people a little better understanding of why people like yourself because I consider miracles a sign gift. In other words, even if you had a miraculous healing, you're still going to die someday, whether it's at 150 or 120. I don't know when you're going to die. But at some point, the thing is that it acts as a sign gift, so you're able to use that to save people so they don't go to die from the second death. So,
Amen.
in a sense, the first thing we have to understand, and we're not talking about miracles done by some kind of a spirit healer in the Philippines that pulls a tumor out of your chest by doing some kind of, satanic experiment with turkey or chicken blood or something. Well, we're talking about a real miracle by God. You're either instantly healed or healed in steps. Maybe you have to do certain things, like when I tell people when they take our Nutrimeds and do different things, we're moving into a wisdom realm where God's going to heal them stepwise, or maybe He just heals them spontaneously. He's the one who's in control. But it's always a sign gift, I think, to tell people that God's there. Don't hang up. Do keep God on speed dial. And as I say to people, I said, the only way to do good is to hear and do God's will. So if you're not hearing God, you're not capable of doing His will. And that's really the point of miracles, is to get people's attention to say, God's still here. He's still into miracles. He's still into saving us and to saving our planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Dr. Bill, you mentioned, being healed spontaneously and instantly, and also in steps. And speaking from my own experience, I had both happen to me. Right. And I think it really stemmed from my relationship with the Lord. I've been a follower of Jesus since I'm a young kid, and, grew up in the church and really had a sense of calling and a sense of God's presence with me throughout my life. I gave my life to Jesus at 15 years old. I became born again. And since that time, I really started I started experiencing answered prayers, little things at first. You pray childlike faith or childlike prayers when you're young in your faith. And when I started to see those prayers get answered, I was like, wow, God, the creator of the universe, He loves me and He's listening to me. He's a personal God. And then as I, grew in my faith, I experienced two miracles that had to do with healing. And one of them was instantaneous and one was a process. But I'll briefly kind of tell you what happened. The first one was I had chronic back pain that developed when I was about 16 years old, and it stemmed from a torn cartilage ring in my lower back, and it was the disc was bulging out and pressing against the sacral nerve. And I was experiencing pain, whether I sat or stood for any length of time. It wasn't severe. It was mild to moderate, but it was just always there. And I'd gone through chiropractic and physical therapy for a number of years. And finally, a couple of years in, I just figured I'd stop therapy because nothing was really working. And I remember having to sit out in gym class, 12th grade. I couldn't wrestle with the other guys. But, I was actually okay with that because I didn't particularly like rolling around with other men in tights. But that's just me. So fast forward to 2001. Now, this was 10 years later. I originally developed a problem in 1991. 2001, Dr. Bill, I'm in a men's retreat with some guys from my church, and we're all out eastern end of Long Island, Montauk Point, in this hotel. There's about 40 guys in this hotel meeting room, and they said, we're going to dedicate this afternoon to prayer to Jesus for physical healing. So if you have any issues, come to the front of the room, and we'll pray for you. So I get online to go to the front, and my friend David is online next to me, and he says, Daniel, what are you going to ask for prayer for? And I said, my back, because I've had this problem all these years. And right then, Dr. Bill, the pain disappeared. I was bending and twisting and nothing. I mean, no one even touched me at that point. No one prayed for me at that point. I believe that was an atmosphere of healing, and like the Holy Spirit was there, and God chose that moment to take the pain away, so I would know it was Him and not doctors or therapy or anything. Which, I'm not against doctors or therapy. That's all good. I mean, God uses different things.
Oh,
uses
yeah,
medicine,
you
uses
can
doctors.
use all kinds of things. Sometimes people need to have surgery.
He'll surprise you and do a miracle, and I believe that was one of those days. And at that point, I didn't really expect anything to happen, because I had people pray for me over those 10 years, and I had so many different types of therapy, and
Well, now we created an atmosphere where you could be receptive to faith. Now, this is an important principle that I try to teach over and over again, so it gets through to people. We are not the author of faith. I hear it again and again with Christians beating themselves up, and I've seen people with cancer and other serious problems. They'll say to me, I'm not getting healed because I don't have enough faith. I said, you aren't the author of faith, God is. You can ask God for faith for your healing, but you should never feel guilty if you're not healed. You should simply come to God in honesty and saying, hey, God, just like I say, if we're the bride of Christ or God, then do you know any wives that doesn't control her husband? They're going to say, hey, husband, God, I need healing. And I know you're there, and I believe you, and you're infinite power, goodness, and in other words, you start praising God, and He shows up and says, you know what? Because you believe I am who I am who I am, which He talked about to Moses, I'm going to show up. So you came into a fellowship of people that made you have a sense of the I am. In other words, you had to be in the right spiritual space to receive faith from God, and then that space, the faith, God said, hey, I'm going to give you the faith now, because you're in that space, you're in that receptive mode. Before, you see, when people pray, they say, God, if you really like me, I'm kind of nice most of the time, but I do screw up, but, I know I don't comb my hair in the right way, and I say curse words once in a while, and I cheat on my taxes, but I'm a pretty good guy. God, do you want to heal me? God says, God, you know what God says? Email not arrived.
Oh, wow.
Email not arrived. Email not, message blocked, Well, I tell people that that's not the right way to talk to God. The best way to talk to God is, hey, God, I'm a sinner, saved by the blood. I know you're God and you can do this. I demand that you show up, not just ask you show up. I know that I don't deserve anything, God, but I know you can do it. Mm-hmm. And guess what? When you get in that right spiritual space, God will say, you know what? I'm showing up. I'm the guy. And He does. That's why you had to be in that space first to receive faith. Then it's like getting a telegram saying the money's in the bank. And welcome back. And Daniel Fazine is here. And of course, your website is divineinterventionradio.com. We're going to post all these links up after the show so people can get your books. Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories. I tell people it's not just miracles of healing. It's healing your relationships, healing your business, healing your nation. We have a nation that is distracted, a nation that is asleep, a nation that's done more good in the world. 90% of the missions in the last century were done by Americans, but it's also done a lot of evil. And the reason is they have not got God on speed dial. They don't know how to walk with God. And what we're trying to teach today is with Divine Interventions, one of the major steps of how do you walk with God? How do you not be full of guilt or self-recrimination? How do you know you feel that the blood has washed away all your sins and you are as white as wool? How do you know that when you can demand things from God, not just say, hey, God, if you really like me. No, God, you need to show up now. I'm dying of cancer. It's metastasized all over my body. My finances are shot. My nation, I got a bomb heading toward my head, and my family is scattered and I don't know if they're alive. And, maybe it's Armageddon. You need to have an international revelation of truth here today, people, so that when times get tough, whether it's you personally or nationally, whatever, that you know that you've got that fourth man in the fire with you, the Most High God. So whether you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or it's the future fire judgment of the planet, or you're just dying of cancer, that God's there with you. And you need to know that today, so you aren't desperate and saying, well, I've been attending church for 50 years and I've been a good boy. 50 years isn't going to get anywhere. God does not grade on the curve. You can be one day or 10 minutes and you get saved, and God can say, you know, like that man on the cross right beside him, and he died on the cross, and you say, you know, today you will be with me in my kingdom. In other words, your relationship with God is what counts, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So,
you know,
let's get into some of these miracles, because this is important that people grasp this. It's not just miracle healing, it's healing of everything. Healing our nation, healing our relationships, healing our finances, which are all screwed up now in our country and worldwide. But it all comes back to these principles we're going to talk about today.
Yes, and I think, you know, you hit on a key point there. How do you know that you're covered, you know, that you don't have to have guilt anymore? And what I try to convey to people is that when you put your trust in the Son of God, in Jesus, Yeshua, Messiah, you know, the whole reason he came to earth was to save us from our sins. And when he shed his blood on the cross, that was the covering. I mean, he shed his blood for us so that we could be free from the curse of sin and death. And when we put our trust in him, when God looks at us, he no longer sees our sin, but he sees the righteousness of Christ. We are covered in that blood by our faith in Jesus. And when you understand that, your identity becomes secure as a child of God, and then you can go to God as if he were your father, and you can ask him for whatever you need, and he'll hear you. You know, and you mentioned that whether you're, you know, dying of cancer or, you know, there's a storm outside, Armageddon, whatever. I mean, I've been in that situation where I was literally dying of cancer. One of the main reasons why I wrote Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today, is because I recovered from lymphatic cancer that doctors said could have killed me within a few weeks to a few months. And I wanted to share that story and many others of hope, you know, and give a broken and hurting world some hope and say, hey, you know what? God is still alive. He is still with us. He is still doing miracles. He wants a relationship with you. And I put these miracles together just to really, not so much for the miracles themselves, but to point people to the God of miracles. Because as you said before, you could be healed of cancer, but you're still going to die of something eventually. And, you know, we can't escape that. No one gets out of this life alive, so to speak. Yeah. But we can know that when we do leave this planet, we're going to go to a better place. We're going to be with the Lord. And the only way we can do that is through Jesus himself, the mediator between God and man. So I really want to point people to Jesus with these miracle stories.
But it's not just an intellectual process. I tell people, you start off in your prayer saying, and this is the way you should pray, God, I'm putting my trust in you, and I know you can show up, and you can give me the faith to believe that I'm going to be healed. And I'm empty. I have no faith. In other words, don't come to the point of view, you are such a good Christian, you can generate faith. No one can generate even one molecule, one centillion of faith. It all comes from God.
Right.
In other words, God is faith is a free gift from God. It's not something we do.
Right.
The only thing we have, the only thing that God gives us is the ability to trust and to love him. Period. Everything else, hope, faith, etc., all flows out of that. And once you as a child start saying to God, you know, I'm completely lost. I'm completely without faith or hope. I have nothing. And you need to show up now. And I need you to give me that faith and that hope so I know there's a future. And guess what? He does. He does, and that's what's amazing to me. And I tell people, I said, don't feel guilty because you don't have it. He hasn't given it to you yet because you haven't gotten to the space where you trust him enough that he can give you that faith. So don't feel angry with yourself. I'm not in that space. You have to be humbled enough to realize that there is no other source of righteousness. One of the things I often see is I call secular humanism or other faiths. And I said a good example is the current Pope, who believes if you're a good atheist, you can get into heaven. First off, heaven starts today when you have a relationship with God. And if you're an atheist, you don't have a relationship with God. And hell becomes evident when the body drops away. That's a very important principle for people to realize. Today, whether or not you're trying to heal and get yourself ready, prepped up for whatever's coming, a CME, you know, a lithospheric slip, your family being, you know, starved because the climate suddenly changed dramatically, or you just got the superstorm going on. Walking with God is the principle we're teaching today with Divine Miracles. Like Divine Intervention Radio, what you're saying is, we can use the body as a good example, but it could be just as easily your finances of your corporation or your communication in your family.
Yeah, any area that needs healing, whether financial, spiritual, physical, emotional, God is in control, and He created you, and He can definitely heal you. It's not a problem for God. But what you said before, we have to become humble and contrite and just kind of empty of ourselves and let God come in and do that.
Right.
And that's what happened in my life, because when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I was trying to figure everything out myself. I was reading so much. I was taking different supplements and trying to just figure everything out. How can I get rid of this thing? I mean, I had a tumor the size of a grapefruit inside my chest, right above my heart. And it was so big, it was literally crushing my pulmonary artery. So I wasn't getting enough oxygen, and I was literally suffocating to death. By the time they found it, it was almost too late, because by the time you have symptoms, often it's already huge. So the doctors were saying, it could kill you within 3 weeks to 3 months. And they said, we'll give you treatment. We're not sure if it's going to respond, but if you don't respond to chemo, you'll be dead within that time. So
right, and so they're speaking negative intentions into you.
Well,
and when God's going to
they're trying to help me, and they want to prepare me, and they're kind of CYA, you know what I mean? They give you the worst-case scenario, because they don't want you to go in with false hope, I guess,
No, let me explain. This is an important principle, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but it's important.
It's okay.
The high priests of the Cohens in ancient Israel had to first serve God in the temple and have all the temple a cappella songs of the holy priest to go in the Yom Kippur to pour the blood in the horns of the altar. They had a rope tied to the right leg so that under the sea cow curtains and the golden rings at the top, if they were unrighteous, God just killed them on the spot when they went into the Holy of Holies. And if they didn't hear the song of the a cappella of the high priest, they knew he wasn't choking on something. They knew he was dead. So they pulled him out under the curtain. And God wouldn't let anybody unrighteous near his people. Now, what happens is, when you're a physician, you're supposed to heal on all three levels: spiritual, which is psychological, spiritual, psychological, and physical. Which is why, for example, even Jesus said, make a potion of mud and put it on someone's eyes, in an operation of faith, and his vision was healed. So the doctors need to be able to speak in all three levels. Come back, and you got some other neat links here too. Of course, you have your colleague Trace Embry. I think he'll be back on later in the summer, talking about his ministry, dealing with some other interesting things with I think children.
Yes, he does a lot of great work rehabilitating troubled kids who have addictions of different sorts, even technology addiction, people who are just glued to their iPhones and they just don't develop the social interaction skills to, interact with other people. They develop behavioral issues like that. So he's doing great work at Shepherd's Hill Academy down in Georgia.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to post all those links up. It's called, I think the website is License, LICENSE to parent.org.
Right, that's Trace Embry's ministry,
Yeah. Now yours is divineinterventionradio.com. You upload radio shows, I think, every week, don't you?
Yeah, just about. It's a weekly show. It airs on about 20 stations over 9 states, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to interview people who've had amazing miracles, from healings to answered prayers, conversion experiences, near-death experiences, financial miracles, all these miracles that just point to the fact that God is alive, Jesus loves us, and he's still intervening in our lives. So it's a real faith booster for me, and hopefully to my listeners as well.
Besides healing, there's a lot of interventions happening with Muslim people living in horrendous conditions, especially women in these third world conditions, but men too, where Jesus will literally come up to them in their dreams and visions and say, "Hey, I'm real," and they're converted.
Absolutely.
Talk about that for a minute, because I think people don't understand that there's persecution, like in communist China. 90% of the new Christians in the world are Chinese.
Yeah,
every day.
The Chinese 90%. Church is growing tremendously, especially the underground church. Persecution has lessened a little bit because of in the official church. The Three Self Patriotic Church was highly regulated by the government. They've relaxed somewhat, from what I understand. I've been talking to Dennis Balcom, who's been a missionary over there for quite a number of years, and he was saying how, that it's still, there's still persecution, but they've relaxed a little bit on the official churches. But in the Middle East too,
let me fill you in on something on that first before you go to the Middle East.
Sure.
Have you heard of Laodai camps? Laodai?
No, I haven't.
20,000 Laodai prison camps in China. If you have one page of the Bible or you evangelize publicly, that's where you used to go. I hope that's not the case now.
Oh, wow.
And Laodai prison camps, immediately, the first thing they do to you is, besides you getting a bash and delousing, they do a blood test and they tissue type you because your organs are now in the open market. Do you know that?
Oh, my gosh. No, I didn't know about that. That's crazy.
So if your tissue type comes up and somebody in a hospital system in Italy or in Germany needs your organs, or Emory University, where by the way, they tried to recruit me back when I was working in Georgia to work for a network of doctors that would procure organs or help to make those procured organs available by airstream jet to arrive to their millionaire or very wealthy person to transplant their heart, liver, kidneys, etc. And that is done from Laodai prison camps. So, and what they do is they actually would charge the family the cost of the bullet to kill the relative as they remove the organs. Literally in little trucks, they actually had the surgical suites and mobile units right by the airport, so they can actually literally wheel right up to the airplane, pop the organs in these freezer containers, and zip, away to go.
Oh my gosh,
so I hope that's
horrible.
Yeah, and people need to know, those people under that kind of persecution, by the way, in China, that's where the church grows like crazy, because when you're up against it and you have nothing but God left, God shows up. He shows up. It doesn't matter what your skin color is, he's going to show up.
Yeah, I've heard of missionaries. Actually, Dennis Balcom was telling me about several missionaries who, they get arrested, they get thrown in prison, they get beaten, they get tortured, and they end up leading their entire cell block to Christ. And then, there's one guy, Brother Yoon, who's in prison many times, and God actually opened the doors of the prison and let him walk out, blinded the guards, and just walked out, kind of like the apostle in the New Testament, kind of same deal.
Yeah.
God is still doing miracles and really fantastic things, getting the word out there. And what I understand is that Christians actually outnumber communists now in China, which is, I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I heard. I hope it's true, but there's a lot of people in China.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when you persecute people, too, they don't have the secular organization because they don't trust the man's laws or man's governance anymore. They only trust God, and God, of course, and that's why I tell people, even in a marriage, the only way that your marriage can last is if before your husband or wife, God comes first, not second. If God comes first, your marriage and your family will come together and stay together despite disputes or differences or problems. But if God's second, your marriage is doomed. And people need to understand that. They need to, because marriages are communications and fellowships, and there's always going to be times when things are screwed up, or there's miscommunications, or disasters happen, or people sin.
Yep.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, right after this interview, my wife and I are going to our weekly Monday night marriage builder Bible study. We try to work on our marriage every week and have, God be the center of our marriage, because, it's tough. There's a lot of financial pressures. There's all sorts of temptations and things like that, and you got to work on your communication skills. You got to be intentional. You both have to want it, put the Lord first, and, He'll guide you into having a successful marriage, but you have to work at it.
Yeah, and that's part of what I call walking with God. But if God says, you put me first and I'll make you still be married after 30 years, and we just celebrated our 30th anniversary.
Oh, happy anniversary. That's a great accomplishment, 30 years.
Yeah, it was
wow.
back in February, 30 years. Yeah, so when my wife had her Mother's Day, it was pretty good, because we have 3 grandchildren now, and she's pretty excited with the latest little baby now. It's less than a month old. Holding this little sweet little Matilda up in Portland, Oregon. It was pretty amazing. So, God blessed us. And those blessings, by the way, that wouldn't occur. You multiply those families millions of times and you have a nation.
Yeah.
You multiply the intentions of a nation and you have a world. Yeah. And that's where I see, the solution to fixing the problem in China with the communist Chinese is Jesus. It's God showing up. It's people saying, hey, I don't want this. So they're going to have more godly leadership if they have more godly people. That's why I Yeah,
Yep.
he's the answer. It's that simple. That's why we're not here to change the political system. We're to change the hearts, minds, and souls of people so they become the living stones of a New Jerusalem. It's not out there, it's us. I call myself a sheepdog for God, but I'm also a mortar man for the New Jerusalem.
Awesome.
Because we're the living stones.
Yeah, and the family being the building block of society. You build a strong family, you build a strong country, a strong society, a strong world. And I think that's where the family has been under such attack, because I think the enemy knows that that's the key, that's the foundation of our society.
It's real simple. The attack is because we're distracted. People are distracted because they're on their, instead of putting time aside for their family or their spouse, they're distracted with technology or sports or other things, and everything gets shoved to the side. They succumb to temptations, and when disaster hits, because they don't have any foundation underneath their relationship and God's not first, it flies apart because there's no foundation. It's like building a house too close to where there's a tsunami zone, or a superstorms can strike, say, along the Gulf Coast. Build it without a foundation, or you don't have a deep enough stilts high enough off so the water will flow underneath it. Bye-bye house. See you later.
Yeah, and Jesus talks about, he tells the parable of those who build their house upon the sand are foolish, and those who build their house upon the rock are wise, because when the storms of life come, the ones on the sand will wash away, but the one built on the rock will stand. And he is the rock. I mean, if we build our life around him and on him, the foundations of the earth can be shaken, everything can be shaken, the heavens can be shaken.
Right.
But if you're safe on the rock of Jesus, you will stand.
Right. So it's not just an intellectual thing. Today, start building a faith relationship, and the faith will come. It's almost like that field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you build the faith relationship, God will give you the faith. It will come.
Amen.
Thank you, Daniel. It was an amazing time. Daniel Fazina, DivineInterventionRadio.com, and his colleague, Trace Embry at licensetoparent.org. We'll have those links posted up. You get his book, Divine Intervention, 50 Stories and Other Information, and listen to his show. Build up your faith.
All right. Thanks,
today
Dr.
for
Bill.
the storms of life. And I appreciate you, Daniel. We'll have you back on soon. And out there, again, you may need to be healed by steps, and that may include Nutrimeds and other technologies, but maybe God's just going to heal you. But remember, he heals in all realms of your life, whether it's personal, relational, physical body, your spiritual life. But he's the author of all goodness, all faith, and all healing. You don't have to do it. He will.